So today's presentation is going to be just a basic introduction to what it is, what Himmelblau is, what it does. Tomorrow I'll be giving a separate talk talking about Microsoft-specific extensions to OAuth 2 and how they affect Entra ID. And William Brown is also giving a pre-recorded talk where he introduces OAuth 2, and then I'll give a follow-up talk. So my talk tomorrow will dig into the nitty-gritty details about how all of this works, but today is just kind of an overview. So I'll introduce Himmelblau and the goals and challenges that I've encountered. Some of you are well aware of the challenges and have been involved in that. The origins of the project, Alexander's familiar with this. He was involved. So in mid to early 2023, I can't remember exactly when, Microsoft requested Linux compatibility with Azure, then Azure Active Directory, which they've since renamed Entra ID. And the representatives from several of the major distros were involved, including Red Hat and Ubuntu, SUSE. SUSE was a little late to the game, actually. We found out a little into the discussions. The goal was to develop a unified approach to authentication with a Microsoft-supplied authentication broker. And I'll explain more in depth tomorrow what a broker is. The plan was that the distros would handle integrating that broker authentication with PAM and NSS. So some of the early challenges, Microsoft, of course, had taken on the role to provide this proprietary broker, which would be closed source. And Canonical was concerned that Microsoft had made lots of plans, but had not provided any actual broker for us to implement with. And it had all been discussions. My objection to the plan was that I was not comfortable with the proprietary broker, and I did not think that the community would support having a proprietary broker distributed on their systems. So I think it was early 2024, Canonical unexpectedly released their AAD Auth package, which was pretty rudimentary. It was an NSS module and a PAM module, which talked to each other over a socket and stored their data in a SQL database with no daemon. It used a Microsoft-supplied authentication library to provide very, very basic authentication. It had one very major flaw, and that was that when they were presented with an MFA challenge, they said close enough and let you in. So the only authentication that it did was password authentication, and when MFA was required, it just ignored it. In late 2023, so I guess it would have been late 2023 that we saw that package released, Microsoft paused the collaboration, and I spent some time trying to package Ubuntu's AAD Auth for OpenSUSE, and I found it to be of extremely low quality. And so in discussions with William Brown at SUSE, he and I decided that we would start a new project. And I started building a custom MSAL's Microsoft's authentication library. Started building a custom library for authenticating to Entra ID, which is now called libhimmelblau. And I collaborated early on with the ConEDM's community. That's a OAuth 2 authentication provider, and I forked their client code. William Brown heads up that project, and that's why we ended up using that code. It provided a really stable core base for Himmelblau, and that was the reason for that. It just required a lot of customization. Well, by the way, you guys are welcome to ask questions during the talk if you want to jump in. So of course I forked the ConEDM client, and my approach with Himmelblau was to provide MFA support first of all, and that was a primary priority. I did not want to use Microsoft Priority components or their open source libraries because we had no way of modifying them. Security and maintainability is, of course, our core principles, priorities of the project. Rapid community adoption led me to increase more and more of my time in Himmelblau to the point where I am very busy. So, looking ahead, I would like to see more cooperation with Microsoft, specifically to enable Intune policy compliance on Linux. Right now, I have one supported method for policy compliance, and that's to lay down a script which users can implement to enforce whether or not a user can sign in based on device compliance. Microsoft's Intune policy for Linux allows you to distribute a script that checks for compliance. I have started implementing the basics of this, but it is with some major limitations in that I cannot enroll in Microsoft's Intune. I cannot enroll the device in Microsoft's Intune because it's some kind of proprietary protocol, and their own binaries are using certificate pinning, and it's written in Rust, and so I cannot bypass the certificate pinning without some major hackery, which I have attempted but was not successful. So I can't see what the packets are in order to implement the Intune enrollment. But we do have device enrollment in Entra ID supported. Intune is like group policy, if you're familiar with group policy. Intune is basically cloud group policy. I'd like to improve the user experience. I've been talking with some of the users who would like to implement a new GDM login window that supports browser-based authentication. While this would provide better authentication support, it could also lead to a browser breakout from the GDM window. So it's not ideal, but it would be better supported if we could supply a browser at the login window. I've also thought about expanding beyond Entra ID and also supporting Google Workspace.
What is browser-based authentication?
So, the OAuth 2 spec does not define authentication. Most people think it does. It defines authorization. The authentication part is undefined and is handled differently by every implementer of OAuth 2. Microsoft's implementation of authentication for OAuth 2 requires you to open a browser and complete a series of steps in the browser, which have infinite number of endpoints. And then it returns back a authorization code that you can then use to follow an OAuth 2 flow. I'll talk more about that tomorrow. But
so you're running a full browser before you even log into your box?
Yeah. That is what Microsoft requires.
What could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. I'm not doing that now. Himmelblau does it a different way. I'll talk more about that. Not necessarily infinite. No, I will not. I mean, you could click forward and back and forward and back, so it's technically infinite.
Just asking as an application. So maybe I can add, if you bring mic, I can add.
Sure.
Thank you. So we had discussions with Microsoft people who actually implemented support of this in Windows, and it was really, really challenging. They did not find a good way of having secure browser environment before you log in, because it's simply impossible to achieve that with the browser. The browser is so complex. beast in itself, that no matter you do, you always live in a point where things might slip through. One thing to consider is that the browsers actually require access to hardware, active access to the hardware to do its job, like just GPU access. And that's already a hole big enough to contain all security issues that you can imagine. But there is also access to audio equipment, access to camera, which is needed if you do authentication with Face ID, for example. And then couple this with the fact that you need to support federated authorization. Federated means go into some other identity provider, not yours, but for example, Google. Or from Google or from GitHub go into some other provider that backs that site. They can chain each other. So you have unlimited set of URLs that you have to white list or blacklist and so on. And this is an easy way to abuse because you don't control how Google or GitHub or any other company or project structures their login page. They might include some links that can lead you to open google.com in the end. So before you're authenticated, you have access to the browser page that you can use for whatever you want. And browsers can run a lot of stuff nowadays. It's not web, it's really a computer, right? So that's a huge problem, and solving it, huge security problem. Solving it with the right way of isolating things is pretty much not possible at this point. If community wants to solve this on at least Linux, we need to solve isolation, separation, and everything like that from the system itself, from the host, and against the host. So this is really going into, like, we need to have working confidential computing first to protect this attempt to log in from the host, and then protect the host from being able to log in there and load, side load some malware into it, and so on. So these are like tasks in its own. We had a prototype together with folks from Canonical that ran this embedded browser in GNOME shell, which is essentially what the GDM does. Mm-hmm. So there is a prototype like 3 years ago at FOSDEM. We had it, and we're still there.
Yep.
We could run W3M or links in the terminal window.
I've thought about this.
That doesn't work.
I actually tried that.
Yeah, most of the things in the identity providers login pages heavily based on use of JavaScript.
Okay. Well,
features.
I wasn't going to get into this today, but I'm going to mention how Himmelblau works around this.
Yeah.
So I'll briefly mention, Himmelblau instead does get and post requests, and there's some peculiarity about the way Microsoft handles their authentication flow that is very helpful to us, and that's that all of the necessary authentication data is dumped into a JSON blob on every single page. And if they hadn't done that, we wouldn't be able to do this. But because all of the necessary information is in that JSON blob that we just have to parse from the page, we can handle the MFA, all of the different situations and scenarios, just by dumping the page and reading that blob, and then knowing from that blob how to respond to the request. It's a little bit ugly. And that's why I've been talking to Microsoft. We want this documented. Because until Microsoft documents that blob has to be there, we don't know if they're going to take it away. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Microsoft sidestepped the issue, I think, with
I'll talk about that more tomorrow. We're getting there. This group here is more interested in the details I'm sharing tomorrow, clearly. Okay, so I don't know if you're aware, I started integrating the Himmelblau Daemon in Samba. That kind of fell apart. It runs. It actually works right now, but it is seriously lacking in functionality. It's still in experimental stage. The reality is that I had so many people asking for help with the standalone project that I have moved away from the Samba integration, simply because I don't have time to work on it. So I've shifted my priorities, and the standalone Himmelblau is now my primary focus. But I don't have a problem with continuing the Samba integration. It just needs more support. I need more time need more code review happening, more Rust expertise. We've got some of that happening here. Andreas has started doing Rust, and we've got Samuel as well. But we need more community members to learn Rust. Of course, Alexander does too. So my focus is changing. For now, Himmelblau is going to remain a standalone project, but my priority is going to be in seamless authentication with SMBD. And there's a number of ways we can accomplish that, and I'll talk about that. Community users are actively asking for this in the Himmelblau community. They want to be able to authenticate to their SMBD server running with their Entra ID credentials, because the organizations want unified authentication everywhere. But one possible integration approach, I won't pretend that I understand anything about this, but Andreas and Alexander are talking about this next, so it's just watch for that. This is part of replacing NTLM, is providing a local KDC. Another alternative is something that the folks at Tranquil IT, are they in here? Oh, I guess they're not here. So they would have been interested in this part. Tranquil IT was asking about Active Directory sync to Microsoft Entra ID. That's their Entra ID Connect. There is an open source project that syncs Samba AD with Entra ID. And that's one option, because in Himmelblau, we have support for cloud TGTs and TGTs from on-prem synced to the local host, which gives us Kerberos access to the on-prem AD. So that's an option. That's probably the easiest option, and this might even work right now. I haven't tested it. Somebody please do. A third option is to provide a Samba-backed Entra ID compatible authentication provider. So basically we could build Entra ID in the Samba AD in the cloud. Some kind of Entra ID version of Samba ADDC, which does OAuth too. And we could duplicate Microsoft's authentication protocols and everything. That would be one option. We could even supply SMBD to serve like Azure Files does. This would allow people to self-host. What's that? I agree, but it's huge. It's going to be huge. Yeah, we need hands, exactly. Case, you're right. I said your name wrong again. So Case is absolutely right. We need hands in this to get it implemented. So this is one of the options. Okay, so I want to talk about Himmelblau adoption. And this is kind of fun. So this has been the past. So this was where we stood 3 weeks ago when I created this presentation. You can see here version 0.9.4 was released early March. And I'd seen roughly 200 downloads of that latest release. 0.8.3 had been the most popular release before that. And just for reference, there's 053 from last September. There's also releases going off that way, and they were like a couple of downloads here and there. Well, within the past few months, I've seen this rather large increase in user base, and I updated this chart this morning. And those are the downloads from 3 weeks ago. That's today. Yeah, so I'm seeing rather rapid adoption rates, and it's climbing. So the project is progressing with the demand from the community. There were over 500 unique downloads of the latest version 098 within about 2.5 weeks, which means means about one download per hour in the past. One unique download per hour in the past 2.5 weeks. I'm getting about 1 to 2 new users contacting me for support every day. And I'll point out that this number is just the download count. That's not actually the adoption rate. I know for sure there's at least one company that's downloading it once and deploying it to 400 machines using their own repos. And I don't know the exact numbers for every user, but there are other companies that have contacted me and said that they're deploying it throughout their company. There's universities that are deploying it for all of their students.
Are you the only name on the support list?
Yeah, that's me. I'm the only one. That's why I'm here, begging you to help me. Yeah, so support is all routed to me. William Brown helps with some of the more complex stuff because he's pretty well involved in a lot of the cryptographic stuff. And I wanted to point out that we have a couple Microsoft folks here, it looks like. So Microsoft should take note of this. This is your customers. Every single one of these is one of your customers, and they're only turning to me because you're not doing it. So here's some more details, trends from the project. Some traffic trends. The websites peaked views with 900 users viewing it per week. The unique users is rising. In the past 3-month period, I've seen 2,800 active users on the website. Various other details. A total of 3,500 downloads of the project. So Himmelblau is growing faster than, I say we, but I really mean me. Faster than I can keep up. So usage is surging. Organizations are looking for a seamless Entra ID experience on Linux, and Himmelblau is delivering that. Support requests are increasing, feature demands are growing, and we're pushing the limits of what just a couple of guys can manage. So I'm doing most of the development. William Brown is helping with some of the development, some important stuff, and then I have a few members in the community that are doing all of the testing on their own. So current features. So ID mapping, there's technically 3, but I didn't list the other one because I don't like it. RFC 2307. We can now sync RFC 2307 attributes from an on-prem AD. That was added a couple months ago. And we also found that, I say we because I did this with a community member, we can create a client application in the cloud to store those same attributes so that we can have cloud-only 2307 ID mapping. So that provides seamless user integration between on-prem AD and Entra ID. This was critical for a number of customers, users, because they're deploying it alongside WinBind and SSSD or Samba AD, and they need seamless ID mapping. Did I see a hand go up?
That's what I was saying. Alongside this, they're deployed.
Where?
They have their
Yeah.
20-year-old IDs in the
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I also provide UPN name mapping. using SSSD code, actually, from Simo, I think, wrote it. I can't remember. Sumit did. My bad. That's who wrote it. So I'm using their ID mapping code. In C, I compiled it and linked it into Rust. So the authentication methods are pretty flexible. We've got hello pin enrollment. This is doing actual hello enrollment. I'll complain tomorrow about Ubuntu's approach, which pretends they're doing hello enrollment. This is actually duplicating Microsoft protocols here. I support password-only authentication only because a call center demanded that it be an option. Call center in India. So, and Windows supports it too, so fair enough. So we support, as long as you enroll the device using a MFA account, so an ITM admin, for example, then a regular user can authenticate with password-only auth, which surprisingly is still allowed. I didn't realize that they would allow that. And even permits access to the Azure portal, which Microsoft policy explicitly prohibits, but allows anyway. I reported it as a bug, and Microsoft said, so I guess it wasn't important. I have device authentication grant as an authentication mechanism, but I also have my experimental MFA flow. I call it experimental because it's doing the scraping that JSON blob. We can't know for certain that that's always going to work, but I'm hopeful. And with that, I support FIDO keys authentication, Microsoft Authenticator, third-party authentication apps, etc. I think I'm going to skip ahead. Am I about out of time, or no? I've got till the top of the hour. Top of the hour. Okay.
I'll let you know in a second.
Oh yeah. Okay. I'm good. I think I'll make it. I was worried I was running out of time. So I provide various customization and compliance stuff. Obviously, being from the Samba team, I'm used to Winbind having lots of options, and people ask for options, and I add them. So whatever. I'm permitting mapping of names to a CN so that it's easier to type in the username. And somebody asked for a custom mapping script because all of their local users had the same, matched the CNs in Entra ID, and so they needed to map it. So anyway, I've got experimental Intune enforcement coming soon. The way that is going to work is that you can create a client application in Azure that grants you access to read Intune policies, and then I can do it on behalf of authentication and request access to the Intune policies, and then scrape the Intune policies straight off the server to read the policy script from Microsoft Intune for Linux. And then I can apply that policy and reject authentication if the compliance fails. But again, I cannot enroll in Intune because of the limitations of not knowing the protocol. I've implemented single sign-on for Firefox and Chrome. It distributes access tokens and PRTs. We do have PRTs because we are enrolled. We also have, I don't remember if I mentioned this, but we get a TGT, cloud TGT from the PRT. So we have Kerberos integration too. I did mention that. The plugin is automatically installed using a browser policy when we install the Himmelblau SSO package, and it enables seamless authentication for Entra ID, Office 365 apps, etc. Users are automatically signed in with their host credentials, and no extra login is needed. There's no need to re-authenticate. I was talking to Tom about this morning. You don't have to refresh your tokens because all of the token refresh is handled automatically, seamlessly in the background by the Himmelblau Daemon. Okay, I'm going to show you a demo of how it looks today, roughly. I did a video so that we wouldn't run into problems. So this is just downloading the packages from the website. These are the packages for OpenSUSE Leap. I've got it fast forwarding because I didn't want to wait for my own typing. Yeah, I've got, well, we have packages in OpenSUSE and soon to be in SLE, but there are no distro-specific packages you can fetch. I support multiple distros, but you have to fetch them from my website. I'm building for Fedora and RHEL. I had somebody, what's that? No. I'm using Docker images to build. I had somebody just a couple days ago request that I build Himmelblau for RHEL 7. It worked. I've got Debian 12, Ubuntu 22.04, and Ubuntu 24.04. It was relatively easy to implement package building. I just run it through, like I said, a Docker image. And you can see I'm configuring PAM here. Oh, and I also set the only required parameter in the configuration file is the domain name. And theoretically, we don't need that either. We could determine the domain name from the authenticating user, but I figured we should at least restrict to the domain name who's authenticating. So I require that parameter, but theoretically, it's not necessary. Just like a Windows host, you could enter in your user the first time you pick up a Windows host or a Windows laptop, and it will just determine how you're logging in, what domain, etc. That's how it works now, by the way. Unlike in Active Directory, you don't need to go through a special device enrollment process. Device enrollment happens the first time you authenticate to the host, and Himmelblau does the same thing, same as Windows. Anyway, here I've just started, enabled the services. You can see it's up and running. I have to stop and disable NSCD. There's, for obvious reasons, there is a distro called NixOS. I don't know if you're familiar with that. NixOS funnels all of their NSS through NSCD. You can't not have NSCD. So somebody in the community provided NixOS packages, and it, Himmelblau's NSS runs through NSCD, but I don't know how all that works. That's the CN of a Entra ID user, my David Mulder username. I just entered my Entra ID password. It's sent the authentication flow to Entra ID, and we got back an entropy number that I'm now entering into my Authenticator app. As soon as I complete that, it will seamlessly enroll the device in Entra ID. You won't even see it. It just completed. So that was device enrollment. And now it's doing hello pin enrollment, which sends a separate request to Entra ID, registers a public key that I can then authenticate. The private key is encrypted either in the TPM or in a soft HSM on the host. And the only way to decrypt that private key, or well, not even decrypt it, but and the only way to sign a request using that private key is to provide that PIN number. And that's how hello enrollment or hello pins work on Windows. And here I'm just going to show you SSO. See, there's the plugin that's providing SSO. And I'm a Azure Portal admin in this case. But Then also Office 365 works, of course. Microsoft Teams, etc. Everything works because it's all signed in. And you could see it was seamless. The authentication portal came up, and we injected the it's called a PRT token into the browser as it was loading. Thanks, Ralph. Of course, just showing you that Excel works. It's already authenticated. All right. I don't have Klist installed, so I have to install it. So I'm just showing you what a cloud TGT looks like. That's why I'm going through this. I wish I could pause it for a second, but look at that weird principal name. Mulder /escape at himmelblauidm.org at kerberos.microsoft.com, microsoftonline.com. That's a cloud TGT. That is not the on-prem TGT. This particular tenant does not have on-prem enabled, so. Well, it does now, but it didn't when I was testing this. I'm just going to show you what it looks like if I disable the MFA flow, where we're fetching that JSON blob. Restart the daemon, and then authenticate the user. Oh yeah, and then I also have to run this command that that enables the permits GDM GNOME shell extensions, and that's because I created a GNOME shell extension which adds a QR code to the authentication window, so that we can show a QR code when using a DAG authentication.
This will be a standard thing in next GNOME releases once we finish it.
Good.
Without
this hackery. Yeah. Okay.
This is with the JSON-based PAM exchanges.
And I'll implement that when it's available. Use a different user, Tux, and you can see that's what the login looks like with that QR code. And I'm going to go ahead and skip past this now. Okay, because I'm about out of time. But that would have authenticated you the same way, but you authenticate on a separate device instead of on the same host. So, some lessons I've learned along the way. Many of the users are IT admins with very basic Linux skills. These are Windows folks. They're looking for unified authentication in their mixed OS environments. They expect a Windows-like experience on Linux with seamless integration into Entra ID. Interestingly enough, the dominant platform has been Ubuntu, despite Canonical offering their competing Auth solution. Most of the users, by far, have been people abandoning Ubuntu's project. One problem I'm running into is that some users are prioritizing convenience over safety, which highlights the need for both. They would much rather have it be easy than for it to be secure. So we really need to provide passwordless options. I do provide one passwordless option right now, which, as far as I'm aware, Microsoft really only supports one as well, which is to enable passwordless authentication in the MS Authenticator app, which allows you to bypass the password and just enter the entropy code in your phone. It's not using passkeys. I'm not sure how that works, but I guess I've heard that there are other ways to do that. Anyway. So some other lessons I learned. Rust is not necessarily a silver bullet. A lot of people will say it is. It can have security vulnerabilities, but they mostly come from unsafe code in third-party crates, and crate abandonment is a serious issue. Crates are like third-party modules that you can insert into your Rust code. And when the crates get abandoned, they don't get fixed. And if there are security issues, then you have to abandon that crate and rewrite your code, which can cause some major issues. Rust is pretty reliable, though. From my experience, it's a very steep learning curve, but it's surprisingly easy to use once you've mastered it. From my opinion, the biggest strength is that once it compiles, it just works. And I love that about Rust. As long as you don't have any really glaring logic errors, Rust simply works. It's pretty stable and reliable. I've been impressed by that. And I was a Python guy and was not happy about having to use Rust, so. Okay. Cooperation with Microsoft has been a pretty mixed experience. Microsoft guys have been helpful documenting some in common on-prem AD products, which we've discussed here in the past. There is no MFA, or no, actually, I should have changed it. There's no authentication documentation at all. There's sparse device enrollment docs. The docs that are provided are just plain wrong, but there was enough documentation to patch something together. They have zero transparency on Intune. That is a big one. Even though Linux is officially supported, and I'm saying it's kind of an odd disconnect because Microsoft is building their own Intune for Linux, but they aren't documenting how it works for the open source community. The official proprietary binaries from Microsoft, which only support Red Hat and Ubuntu, specific versions of them, are buggy and unreliable, and this is coming from users. Microsoft customers, mind you, are complaining that Microsoft is over-promising and under-delivering because they make big promises and then it just doesn't work. In my attempts to study the behavior of their Linux proprietary binaries, the Intune enrollment and the authentication almost always fail. Occasionally it works and I can scrape data from it, but it's usually broken. And customers, Microsoft customers, my users, are complaining about the same thing. They can't get it to work. And part of that might be because it's some hacky, weird Java, Rust, C beast. I don't know. So future roadmap, I want to see full Intune integration. We need Microsoft cooperation for that. We currently lack Intune enrollment and compliance notifications. So you have to enroll the device and then send notifications back to Intune to tell it that we're compliant. And then I want to get Google Workspace integration working so that people can transition between cloud providers easily. And that's it.